Good afternoon. My name is Brian Lin, and first of all, I'd like to thank you guys for bringing me back to Vancouver. I used to live here 2 years ago, and this is where I got my journalism training. This is where I became a press officer and worked with media and journals on promoting science and research news. And not to be gratuitous, but tomorrow is my birthday, so this is like the perfect work trip for me. So I hope what I'm about to share will be of interest and use to you. Certainly has been fun for me to be back. Now, Mark and Heather have talked a little bit about why institutions and researchers are interested in doing media outreach. Now, from the perspective that I've been able to see from the institutional side and now working at EurekAlert, for the journals, media outreach provides a really good opportunity to enhance your reputation. Now, it's also a really good service for your support for your editors and service for your authors, because when you have better reputation, you tend to get higher caliber scientists who want to publish with you, and that hopefully makes your editors' jobs a little easier. When you do media outreach, you're also magnifying the impact of the research that's being published in your publication. So to the authors, it's helping them fulfill some of the public engagement or public outreach requirements for funding agencies, but it also can avail them to other means of funding, for example, philanthropy or industry collaborations. So now, last but not least, research has shown that high-quality, influential media coverage does increase citations. Scientific blogs have also been shown to increase altmetrics influence. So if for nothing else, you know, it's good for business. How many of you are familiar with EurekAlert? Oh, great. I can go through this really quickly. So we are a nonprofit, editorially independent, voluntary news consortium operated by AAAS. And you're saying, what the hell does that mean? So at the core, we are an embargoed news service, and we were set up 20 years ago by a group of press officers to facilitate better access of scientific information to reporters. And we are guided by an advisory group of reporters and public information officers, or PIOs. You'll hear me use that term a lot. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary two weeks ago on May 20th. And for those of you who are curious how we got started, Wired published a really great story about us a couple of weeks ago, and it was nicely shared on social media, and we got some shout outs from reporters and PIOs for our 20th birthday, so it was pretty cool. So EurekAlert sits at the intersection of news gathering efforts of reporters and media outreach efforts by publishers and institutions. So in principle, eligible reporters get free access to embargoed or public press materials. PIOs pay a fee for services, and eligible news releases from accredited institutions and peer-reviewed journals are accepted. Now, how this works on a day-to-day basis is we credential PIOs and reporters for password-protected access to our system. And then we also personally, we have a team that reviews every single press release that's submitted to us against our long-standing eligibility requirements. So we are, what I like to say, we are a fee-for-service, not pay-for-play. So not everything that's submitted to us gets posted on EurekAlert. So the goal is to only include news releases that meet the bare minimum newsworthiness requirement, because that's what our reporter registrants expect to see on EurekAlert. And in terms of research news, which is our most popular, most widely used category of news, we also require that the underlying research has been peer-reviewed or has undergone other types of rigorous scientific process. So in other words, when a reporter comes to EurekAlert and they see a research news release, they can have a certain degree of confidence that the science itself is fairly valid. So we serve approximately 12,000 reporters, about 10,000 PIOs from 5,000 institutions, and even though we were set up originally as a service for reporters and PIOs, we've actually over the years amassed a huge public following of scientifically interested public, and to the tune of about 2 million views per month by 775,000 visitors. We get about 200 press releases a day. Last week, we just reached the 300,000 milestone in our archive, so we now have 300,000 press releases going back 20 years. We also are active on social media. We have about 15,500 likes on Facebook, 26,000 followers on Twitter, and about 150,000 fans on Weibo, which is the Chinese version of Twitter. And these are just some of the journals who trust us with their content, and some of the media outlets whose reporters use us to gather story ideas. So, from my experience, successful media outreach tends to result from a combination of 3 pillars: a strong press team, ample lead time, and a coordinated approach. So the press team plays an important intermediary role between the publishing and the academic culture and the news and journalism world. And so members of the press team should have strong news judgment. You should know what topic or what paper might be of greatest interest to reporters and in turn the public. Now they also should be able to translate scholarly information into news. So you are not supposed to just take the abstract of a paper and put the title press release on top and send it out. Sometimes that works, most times it doesn't. Now, the press team will probably encounter authors with a wide range of experience in dealing with the media. So the ability to be able to at least give basic coaching to these authors who may not have interacted with the media before will be really helpful. And as I will talk about a little bit later, the ability to strategize and collaborate with other stakeholders will go a long way. So the best press team would not be able to do much if they didn't have time. So this is a sample timeline for press outreach from a PIO's perspective. I'm not sure if you can see the tiny little colorful words, but basically it starts with, from PIO's perspective, it starts with the paper being accepted. That's typically when they kick into gear. PIO can be notified often by journals directly, or they find out from researchers through internal means. Then a news release is drafted or other materials are collected, multimedia, infographics, that type of stuff that supports telling that story. And somewhere around there, the paper is scheduled and therefore the embargo is set. So the embargo obviously is typically the date and time where the paper is published online or in print. Usually the embargoed outreach period is about a week for most journals that I have had the pleasure to work with. That could vary from journal to journal. But that is the period of time when it is permitted to reach out to trusted reporters and start giving them source materials. And this allows them time to do the reporting, talk to researchers, gather any other information they need before the embargo lifts. And so typically the paper is published at the same time when news stories are pushed out. Now, this time here is very valuable lead time for PIOs in order to do all the work that they need to do. Sometimes PIOs don't find out about papers until they're actually scheduled for publication. So that really compresses the amount of time they have to do all the work that they need to do. Sometimes authors misunderstand the instructions and don't actually tell PIOs until the embargoed outreach time starts. So they read the acceptance letter and misunderstands that they can't talk to anyone until this time. And so again, that compresses the amount of time that PIOs have to work with the source material, and in turn gives reporters even less time to do the reporting. Like Heather said, a really good press team can sometimes turn around something in a very short period of time. But the more time you can give them, the better. And that's where you as leaders at journals can really make an impact. So unfortunately, for the most part, finding out about a paper after it's been published is very detrimental to media outreach. For most reporters and editors, a paper that was published yesterday, unfortunately, is old news. So in your acceptance letter, clearly communicate your guidelines around media outreach. When can you start embargo outreach? And encourage them to reach out to their own press officers in their institutions, as well as reach out to your press team so that they have support while preparing for outreach. Consider notifying PIOs at acceptance. Some journals will do this at acceptance and once again at schedule. So this maximizes the potential for PIOs to act on this information. And don't forget, funders are keenly interested in seeing the work that they funded get promoted in the news media. And they are very interested in working with your team and the institution and PIO teams to promote the news. So don't forget about them. So a coordinated approach leverages your own resources as well as the resources and networks of all the authors and their institutions. So first of all, your press officers may decide to highlight a handful of papers. I know some journals that push out 50 papers a week. There's no way that your team can give attention to all 50 papers. There are enormous opportunities through a coordinated approach to both increase the coverage on the papers that you are highlighting and the ones that you haven't chosen to highlight. Now, different authors have different expertise that sometimes are aligned with their institution. They also have, their PIOs also have influences over their local region. So utilizing their expertise and networks can get you into places that you potentially could not reach. And very importantly, I think the idea of having a diversity of voice in science communication has really come to the forefront. So encouraging more authors to communicate their piece of the pie, so to speak, in terms of the study, can really help with this diversity of voice. When you do this, you're actually helping build relationships between your own team and institutional PIOs. But you're also helping more reporters get to know your journal titles and potentially follow up and find more story ideas from your journal. And so, again, you know, the coordinated approach really ends up serving your authors more because it's giving them more opportunities to connect with media and actually, you know, learn some new skills that they otherwise may not have. Now finally, the best laid plans can fall apart at the last minute. I'm sure a lot of you understand this. So a few tips or reminders. Notify institutional PIOs. Like, I cannot emphasize this enough, not just because I used to be a PIO and I love it when I have the luxury of time and energy to work on something, but it actually does help you magnify the impact. Confirm and reconfirm embargo release times. Oftentimes the editors will tell an author, oh, I think your paper is going to be published in this issue. And then things change, and the PIOs never got that information. So they would upload a press release a week early. And that's when embargo breaks often can happen. So it's a good idea to designate your press officer as the go-to person to confirm publication date and time, and therefore the release, embargo release time. Now, as I mentioned earlier, reporters are always looking for different angles to the same story. They may pick up a wire story, but they're keenly interested in finding an angle that meets the needs of their own audience. So here in Canada, most media like to get the Canadian angle on a big story. So when you have an astronomy story that has perhaps 100 institutions and 1,000 authors, the Canadian media is not at all, not as interested in getting that main story that may be coming out of NASA or ESA, but what the Canadian contribution is. And you can sort of play with that scale to a larger extent to continents, or to a really small extent to cities and towns and even neighborhoods. And that's how you can get a diversity of media coverage. If you are hosting your own embargoed news site for press materials, make sure that you provide opportunities for institutional press officers to upload their own materials and make that information available at the same time. This allows reporters to take a look at all the materials that's available to them and pick and choose what works best for their audience. And again, this will increase the quality, the diversity, and the quantity of news coverage. Thank you.